They would leave, go get treatment, and they realized that there was invasive procedures that were done.
What procedures were they doing?
Hysterectomies and tubal ligations and tubal removals, ovary removals, DNCs.
Dawn Wooten was a nurse inside a Georgia correctional facility. Her story is one unimaginable in this age.
They were being sterilized without consent.
This week, claims of alleged medical abuse against dozens of women, what happened to them, and the woman who blew the whistle on it.
Last winter's Olympics in Beijing featured a rising American skating star and an exceptional story of intrigue.
What were you afraid of if they made the arrests prior to her coming back?
Well, I was afraid that the Chinese government might take her or hold her as hostage.
A father's concern about his daughter takes us back decades to China's infamous crackdown at Tiananmen Square. His survival then and warning now.
There's a lot of money in limbo. Old U.S. savings bonds that should be returned to the American families who once invested in the country's survival.
How much money does this amount to nationally?
Right now, it's up to $27.9 billion.
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. We begin today with an interview with a remarkable woman, a whistleblower who exposed alleged medical abuses of prisoners that evoke images of another era, when women deemed to be unfit for whatever reason were sterilized without their knowledge or with coerced consent. The story starts in Ocilla, Georgia, and a nurse named Dawn Wooten.
I was a med-cart nurse, I was a sick-cart nurse, I was a triage nurse.
Dawn Wooten worked at the Irwin County Detention Center in Ocilla, Georgia, a private medium-security prison. The prison had a contract with the federal government to detain illegal immigrants. And when COVID-19 hit in 2020, Wooten says what she saw exposed serious lapses, poor practices, and startling revelations.
You had a lot of ill detainees?
Yes. I remember talking to a supervisor and seeing the forms that needed to be filled out, sent to the health department. They were not being sent to give an adequate number of COVID positive inmates that we had inside the facility. The medication forms and the inmate forms that were supposed to be sent were being shredded.
Who was shredding the documents?
There was a colleague of mine that was shredding the documents inside the facility.
You saw the person doing it?
Yes.
She says that colleague, another nurse, told her they were only shredding duplicate records. Not true, says Wooten.
I reported to my supervisor, and the response that she gave was, "Girl, she know better than that. Those are her license."
What does that mean?
In other words, it's on her. Those were her license. So if she didn't value her license, she knew she wasn't supposed to be shredding. The supervisor knew she wasn't supposed to be shredding, but she wasn't reprimanded for shredding them.
Wooten also discovered, she says, other COVID forms being withheld from reporting to the local health department.
And how did you come to find out that they weren't being properly reported?
The supervisor at the time had forms on her desk, and I inquired about those forms on her desk, and I asked her, were they supposed to be logs? Were we supposed to be turning those in? She turned it over and told me to get the hell off her desk.
But Wooten's most startling discovery was yet to come. It came when women inmates at the Irwin County Detention Center began approaching her, asking about mysterious surgical procedures they were getting that they did not fully understand.
They would leave, go get treatment, and they would return back to the facility to be monitored. They would talk about the incisions that they have had or would have on the abdomen laparoscopically, and they realized that there was invasive procedures that were done.
Wooten began looking up their records. What she found was astonishing. She says a doctor was performing life-changing surgeries on the women that they say they didn't want or properly consent to.
What procedures were they doing?
Hysterectomies and tubal ligations and tubal removals, ovary removals, DNCs.
So you're saying that physicians were sterilizing these women without their permission and unbeknownst to them?
According to the records that were found and released, they were being sterilized without consent. And in my mind, I'm going to, this can't be happening. I don't see what I see. I can't be observing what I see. This can't be the same for just about every chart. What is really going on was the question that I asked myself.
There's a long documented history of coerced or involuntary sterilization in the U.S., with its roots found in eugenics, the idea of improving society through the planned breeding of people with desirable traits and discouraging procreation among people deemed unfit. Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger believed in using birth control and abortion to improve society through eugenics.
It was good news to us all that the Federal Council of Churches came out openly on the subject of birth control.
She promoted those beliefs, speaking to the white supremacist Ku Klux Klan, and she endorsed a Supreme Court ruling that found states could forcibly sterilize unfit people without their consent. Early research to develop a birth control pill was funded by Planned Parenthood and a leader in the League of Women Voters, Catherine McCormick, with tests conducted on as many as 1,500 Puerto Rican women without their informed consent. Today, Planned Parenthood disavows its founders' controversial beliefs and practices, stating that Sanger undermined reproductive freedom and caused irreparable damage to the health and lives of generations of Black people and other minorities. But controversial practices extended well beyond Sanger's circle. It's reported that in the 60s and 70s, 670,000 women were sterilized in the U.S., including 1 in 4 Native American women, a disproportionate number of Blacks, and nearly 1/3 of the women in the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico who were coerced by the notion that reducing births would help the island's economy. To Wooten, she was seeing shades of that past with illegal immigrant women at the Irwin County Detention Center.
How many women did you know of that this impacted?
We're talking 30 to 50. I left one afternoon teary-eyed and was wondering, what do I do now that I'm uneased and I work here and I'm a nurse and I'm afraid that if something transpires, I'm going to lose my license. I'm mandated to report what I see that is not humane treatment. I made a basis and I talked to my supervisor, and of course I got the answer to leave it alone. I went internally to the head and I asked questions, and I found myself being demoted and moved to a lesser status of employment.
Ultimately, Wooten says she decided to risk her career and go public with what she'd learned. With the help of the whistleblower group Government Accountability Project, she filed multiple complaints with federal bodies. A Senate committee in November concluded that female detainees at the Irwin County Detention Center appear to have undergone excessive, invasive, and often unnecessary gynecological procedures. The federal government did act on Wooten's information. More than a year after she first began logging the alleged abuses, the Department of Homeland Security stopped using the Irwin County Detention Center to hold illegal immigrants and ended its contract with the facility, stating, "We will not tolerate the mistreatment of individuals in civil immigration detention or substandard conditions of detention." As for Wooten, for speaking out against a powerful employer in a small town, she claims she's been blacklisted and gone from working 12-hour shifts to food stamps and welfare.
What came of you bringing these things to light?
I was retaliated upon, unable to find employment that would allow me to work, blacklisting, no community support, no community help. I can't go out in the community and grocery shop without somebody being negative or someone walking up saying, "I bet you would have kept your mouth closed now." Or I've gotten phone calls from nurses that say, "Hey, we know it was wrong. If there's anything that we can do for you, but we just can't sit in the seat that you're sitting in at the moment."
Today, Wooten's complaint about whistleblower retaliation is being investigated by the Homeland Security Inspector General. But however that turns out, she says she followed the only course she saw possible.
What I saw was the inhumane treatment of human beings and lives being decisions made for without consent. And what I did, I would do again.
Since Wooten spoke out, dozens of women have sued, claiming to be victims of unwanted medical procedures at the Irwin County Detention Center. Ahead on Full Measure, Chinese spy intrigue involving a U.S. Olympic skater. China's rivalry with the U.S. spans politics, the economy, and even sports. Today, we have an exceptional story of intrigue about an untold drama happening at the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. Lisa Fletcher reports it surrounds a U.S. figure skater and her father, who was a Chinese dissident a generation ago.
Arthur Liu says it all began with a suspicious phone call. In late 2021, his daughter Alyssa, a national figure skating champion, was preparing to travel to Beijing, China, as the youngest athlete on the U.S. Olympic team. The call, Arthur Liu says, came from someone who claimed to be from the U.S. Olympic Committee.
He actually called me on the phone and saying that I'm from the U.S. Olympic Committee. I need your daughters and your passport copies. And you can fax or email to this and that.
Did you buy it?
No, I didn't buy it. I kind of cut him short. I said, okay, I'll take care of it tomorrow. And tomorrow I didn't do it.
Liu says the true identity of the caller became more clear when a short time later, the FBI asked to meet with Liu at a Starbucks coffee shop near his house in late 2021. They said the mystery caller was actually a Chinese government agent.
Can you describe when the FBI came to you about a year ago and told you were being spied on?
3 agents came, and then they told me, we are FBI agents, and we are here to tell you that the Chinese government has sent people to gather your information.
It wasn't his first encounter with an alleged Chinese spy. For decades, Liu says he's been the target of Chinese intimidation for his criticism here in the U.S. of China's communist regime and his activism decades ago as a student protest organizer in China.
How does the Chinese government view you?
I was one of the most wanted students in South China after the Tiananmen Square massacre.
The Tiananmen Square massacre. One of the most infamous days in Chinese communist history. Tanks and heavily armed troops advanced on students who, for weeks, had been protesting government corruption. The Chinese military shot or crushed those who got in their way.
And then after the Tiananmen Square massacre on June 4th, we heard about the massacre from radio, and then we demonstrated even more. So in Guangzhou, we organized protests and blocked traffic on the bridges, railroads, major public transportation. We just really wanted to express our anger towards the government.
How risky was that for you?
That was very risky because in Beijing, the students, thousands of students and residents had been killed. I think that's why they followed me all the way to America and try to learn what I was doing, with all the protests.
Since then, such large-scale public demonstrations have been rare in China. Which is why many were surprised when thousands of Chinese citizens took to the streets in late November to protest China's aggressive zero-COVID policy, where citizens often were prohibited from leaving their homes. Following those demonstrations, Chinese authorities agreed to loosen COVID measures, but they also appear to be increasing surveillance, and several protesters have been detained.
How has it changed from 1989 until now when we're thinking about the tolerance that the Chinese government has for a protest?
It hasn't changed at all. The government really nowadays has even more tighter control of the people than back 30 years ago. At that time, we had no phones. Nowadays, the government completely knows who you are, where you are, what you're doing.
Technology's given them more power.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Liu escaped China and came to the U.S. as a political refugee shortly after the Tiananmen Square crackdown in 1989. Not knowing then, of course, that he would later have a daughter travel to his birth country to participate as a U.S. athlete in the 2022 Beijing Olympic Games. At age 13, Alyssa became the youngest female ever to win a national title and is the first woman to ever land both a triple axel and quadruple lutz involving 4 mid-air rotations in a single program. For Arthur Liu, keeping his daughter focused on her Olympic dreams and keeping her protected meant keeping his encounter with the FBI a secret. He asked the agency not to arrest the alleged Chinese government operatives until his daughter's safe return from Beijing.
What were you afraid of if they made the arrests prior to her coming back?
Well, I was afraid that the Chinese government might take her or hold her as hostage because she's on Chinese territory. You never know who's around her. You never know who the cleaning lady is for the Olympic Village. Let's put it that way.
Alyssa took 7th place at the Olympics. Shortly afterward, the Justice Department announced charges against 3 alleged operatives, claiming they targeted Arthur Liu and other Chinese dissidents living in the U.S. One is Chinese and based in China and has not been arrested. Another was arrested and released on a $1 million bond. A third, who admitted in court documents to making the mysterious call to Liu, pleaded guilty in December to 2 counts of conspiracy. And like the protesters of 1989 and 2022, Liu says China's intimidation tactics won't deter him from showing the world the truth of what's happening there.
I think we all need to stand up for what we believe and stand up against injustice.
Did China ever admit to spying on him?
No. A Chinese spokesperson last year said the allegations were made out of thin air and accused the U.S. of using it to hype up a China threat.
Sounds familiar.
Got an interesting footnote on this story, though. 2 American employees of the Department of Homeland Security, of all places, were also arrested in this crime. One of them for allegedly accessing a law enforcement database, getting Arthur and Alyssa's passport information, and then giving it to the other person who was arrested, who allegedly passed that information on to the Chinese.
On Homeland Security.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thanks, Lisa. And when we come back, could the federal government be hanging on to money that belongs to you? There's a fascinating battle between states that want to return billions of dollars in money to the rightful owners and the Treasury Department, which, believe it or not, is fighting the effort. Congressman Ron Estes started the challenge over abandoned savings bonds when he was Kansas State Treasurer.
On June 22, 1941, the German armies moved against...
Savings bonds were a big financer of U.S. World War II expenses. Bonds are a way people lend money to the federal government for a fixed period of time in exchange for interest payments at the end. As Kansas State Treasurer, Ron Estes noticed lots of matured federal savings bonds abandoned and unclaimed in safe deposit boxes.
Part of the problem, it may be, is that Grandma and Grandpa may have bought the bonds and then forgot where they put them. They passed away, and their kids or grandkids didn't know where they were. But the U.S. Treasury had that information that a bond was bought by somebody 40 years ago, and the name of the person who bought it at that point in time.
But for decades, the feds haven't been trying to find the legal owners or heirs. When states like Kansas tried to get the information, the Treasury Department wouldn't give it up.
But the bonds are made out to the original person who actually literally loaned the money to the U.S. Treasury. And so we couldn't claim in their name because we weren't that particular individual to actually access that.
Under Estes, Kansas sued to give the state the right to obtain the unclaimed bonds, where they'd go into an unclaimed property database. That way, residents could check and see if they had the right to money they didn't know about under a family member's name.
Have you found that the Treasury Department doesn't seem to be working as hard as you did when you were state treasurer to identify who can take this money now?
They really aren't. I mean, there's not a formal process in the U.S. Treasury Department to actually try to track down people and return the money. So we wanted to make sure that we could at least get ownership of the money so that we can actually help track down, if not the living person, their kids or their grandkids, and return the money to them.
How much money does this amount to nationally?
Right now, it's up to $27.9 billion.
The Treasury Department fought state efforts to return the money, but states won in court. Now Estes and a bipartisan group in Congress are trying to pass the U.S. Savings Bond Act to force the Treasury Department to actively work with all the states looking to return unclaimed billions in savings bond money.
I remember the very first person that I returned the money to. We were at the state fair. Typically, we had a booth at the state fair that people could come by and check and see if we had money belonging to them. And an individual came up and noticed that his parents' names were on the list. And so we had $14,000 worth of money that belonged to them. And so we were able to get that. It was very heartwarming to go through that process and get their money back to them.
Is there any simple way for people, if they want to know if they have money coming to them that they don't know about, to find out?
Yeah, I would encourage everybody to go to your state treasurer's office, go to the unclaimed property division, and look up your name, look up your family members' names, look up your parents and grandparents, or even aunts and uncles. I mean, we're seeing a lot of that multiple generations over the last few decades that money's been turned in. So I would encourage everybody to do that.
As of January, there is a new Congress, and the bill to try to return bonds to the rightful owner, like all bills, has to start all over. After a break, what's ahead next week on Full Measure? Here's a look at what's coming up next week on Full Measure. A nationwide shortage of animal doctors is causing incredible delays in treatment that are sometimes proving deadly for America's pets. Were you aware that people were having more trouble getting appointments, and particularly emergency appointments for their pets?
Over the last 2 years? Oh, for sure, yeah. I used to work at one of the local emergency referral hospitals, and so texting to be like, please, 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 I've got a patient intubated on the table. How do we make this work?
What's behind the veterinary crisis? Next week on Full Measure. If you want to hear more of our stories, you can check out our podcast. It's called Full Measure After Hours, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Until next time, we'll be searching for more stories that hold powers accountable. Thanks for watching. I'm Sharyl Attkisson.